Hello, hello everyone. So good afternoon or good evening. It's great to be here again with you. So tonight we are going to have this roundtable called Integrating Corpus Linguistics in Teacher Education, a conversation across contexts. So we are going to have, there is something strange happening. Just let me see.
Oh, I think it started now.
Okay. Okay, so I'll start again. So hello everyone. It's great to be here. So tonight we are going to have this roundtable called Integrating Corpus Linguistics in Teacher Education, a conversation across contexts. And you can have, everybody's invited to ask questions. You can put it on the chat on YouTube. And then at the end of the talk, okay, the speakers are going to answer and address your questions. So I'm going to introduce, it's my great pleasure to introduce Larissa. Okay, Larissa was a student here at our Federal University of Rio Grande do Sul. She was just a little baby a few days ago, and now she's this like famous scholar, international scholar. She's a professor of linguistics at Montclair State University, and her research interest lies in corpus-based approach to register variation, academic discourse, and second language writing. And she coordinates the Laboratory for Applied Corpus Linguistics Research. So Larissa used to be my junior research assistant like forever, for many years, and she was very cute when she was young. And so it's really nice to have her here, and she organized this talk. So thank you very much, Larissa, for all the work, and thank you very much for all of you. Okay, so Larissa, the floor is yours.
Yeah, can you share the slide with everybody so it's easier? Yeah. So thanks, Simone, for the invitation to be here, and also for giving us an opportunity to talk about corpus linguistics in teacher education. And so Simone already told you the title of our presentation, and can you skip one slide too? I'm not sure if I can control the slides. Oh, I can. So here we are. Simone already introduced me, right? I'm at Montclair State University. We also have Dr. Randy Reppin from Northern Arizona University, Dr. Shelley Staples from the University of Arizona, Dr. Jiyoung Xing from the University of Toronto, Mississauga. I hope I'm pronouncing that right. Yeah. And PhD candidate Ann Deng from the University of Arizona. Yeah, did I do a good job? And yeah, great. So our plan for today and for our panel is to talk about some specific issues and topics in our different contexts of introducing corpus linguistics in teacher education. So each of us teaches in different contexts and in different class formats. Some of us have taught in many different contexts and class formats. So we'll be covering these 8 topics. So the teaching context, the training format, which corporate and corpus tools we introduce to the student teachers, example of activities, learning outcomes, types of corpus knowledges, which challenges we encounter, and some implications and takeaway. This is going to be kind of like an informal panel. Each of us is going to ask one of the questions, and I have the honor of asking the first question, which is, what's your focus and who are your students? So we're going to follow this order where Randy, Jiyoung, and then Shelly answer the question. Does that make sense for everybody? Yeah? Okay, so what's your focus and who are your students, Randy?
So my focus is on low-level literacy. So this means students who either have minimal literacy in English or also minimal literacy in their home language. So it could be either way. And so that's the context that I'll be talking about.
Thank you. What about you, Jiyoung?
Yeah, my students are upper level undergraduates in the linguistics and language education programs at my university. They are a mixed group of domestic and international students, and approximately half of my students are planning to become language teacher, while the other half they're just taking my courses as part of their minor in linguistics.
Anne?
Yes. So I'm actually not teaching, but I'm facilitating different workshops for service teachers who teach writing courses at U.S. community colleges and universities. And these service teachers can be both graduate students and then also experienced instructors that have taught these courses for a long time. So that's going to be the focus of what I will be talking about.
And Shelly, yep.
Yeah, so today I'm going to share a little bit about what I do in our MA TESOL program here at University of Arizona. So our students tend to actually have teaching experience coming into our MA TESOL. They also tend to be international, although we do have some domestic students from the US as well. And they also, there's a range, but some of them are actually teaching while they're doing their MA. So that's a factor too, of course, in our classroom discussions. But they tend to be going to a wide range of contexts too. So also trying to kind of introduce them to strategies that might work, anything from K through 12 through university IEPs, different kinds of contexts.
Yeah. Thanks, Shelly. So in my context, what I'm teaching are teachers who are in the classroom already, usually for a very long time, but they're teaching different subjects and who are looking to get an ESL endorsement or an ESL certificate so that they can become ESL teachers too, aside from their content area. So these are teachers, then again, that have experience, but not teaching English as a second language, not teaching languages necessarily. So as you can see, we have lots of different contexts represented here.
Yeah, so I think our next question is the training format, because as we know, this kind of training in using Corpora in the classroom can take many forms. So we kind of wanted to showcase different ways in which we bring that to the teachers. And we can start with Larissa.
Oh, thank you. So in my case, what I'm teaching those teachers, right, is a pedagogical grammar class. It's mainly how to teach grammar, and I'm incorporating Corpus Linguistics into that context. So this means that it's a 15-week, like a whole semester long course where students meet once a week for around 2.5 hours. So it's a very extensive course.
Great. And Randy.
So my course format is actually, it's not a course, it's a series of workshops. And that can vary depending on the type of learners, the literacy practices that are going on. So it could be that training teachers how to do needs assessment to determine what the students need. Do they need to be able to read manuals or instructions? Do they need to be able to read higher level texts? Do they have the goal of eventually going to university or college? So the workshops are fluid, and one set of workshops might be completely different from the other. So it's a very flexible training format that relies on me having had a lot of experience with this to be able to pass it on to the teachers. And I think it's a really rewarding format, and exciting for teachers too. Scary, but exciting.
And sorry, Randy, just one follow up. So, and where are these teachers located?
So the teachers are teachers who are sometimes part, like in a hospitality course that I was doing, they were the people, the hotel staff, and training the hotel people with language support. Sometimes it's been MA TESOL students at NAU doing their practicum and doing workshops for literacy volunteers and things like that. So thanks for the clarification question.
Yeah, super interesting. Jiyoung.
Yeah, for me, the courses that I'm going to talk about today are really just regular courses. So I have introduced Corpus Linguistics in mainly 3 different undergraduate courses, second language acquisition theory course, technology mediated language teaching and learning course, and teaching methodology course. So these are all in person, 1 semester long courses, and we meet 2 or 3 hours per week. So it's not a lot of time, but still I can incorporate some activities.
Great, thank you. Aang.
Yes, so the course and workshops that I facilitate focus on promoting the use of Corpus to guide instructors in materials creation and also implementation, because there's in-service teacher. However, the focus is on the specific learning context of the students in the writing courses that that these instructors are teaching. So there are different formats that we offer. I once did a 10-week synchronous workshop where instructors and I met one time every week to learn and discuss together different aspects of Corpus Linguistics. And then we also have a program called the Crow's Fellows program with Dr. Shelley Staples and Dr. Randy Reppin and other Crow people. That is a 7-week online program that teachers can work at their own pace with feedback from us facilitators.
Thank you. I have a clarification question for you too, if you don't mind, just because I think people might be interested in this. So are all of the teachers teaching L2 writers, or what kind of classrooms are they going to be teaching in?
I think the writing courses can both be for domestic students and also for L2 writer, depending on the teaching assignments that they got for each semester.
Thank you. Yeah. So, and I'll wrap it up with my context. So again, with the MA TESOL program, we have a number of courses. Of course, as Jiyoung said, anytime I teach a course, you're going to get a little bit of Corpus Linguistics. So I tend to teach our pedagogical grammar class like Larissa, but at the MA level. And I also teach a listening, speaking, and pronunciation class, which I do try to integrate Corpus into, which is a little bit more challenging. I also bring it into curriculum development. And then I do have a dedicated Corpus Linguistics class. And so that's a split MA PhD class, but for the MA students, there's more focus on the pedagogy. And then finally, I am blessed to have colleagues that, even though they're not Corpus linguists, they really value it. And so they tend to bring it in here and there in their classes too, which round out the curriculum for the Masters in Teaching English as a Second Language.
Okay, well, now we're going to move on to our third question or area, which is what corpora and corpus tools do you introduce and why? So I guess, Shelley, well, you just finished talking. Maybe you shouldn't start. How about Aang?
Sure, I can start us off. So in the workshops that we facilitate, the focus is on introducing our Crow Corpus, which is a learner corpora that is built from student writing in the first year composition courses. Of course, some of the institutions that participated in the Crow Corpus, which is the University of Arizona, Purdue University, and Northern Arizona University. And the Crow Corpus that we use contains text from assignments that are assignments like a literacy narrative. So it's a narrative assignment where students talk about their experiences with language, or maybe position arguments, literature review, more research-based type of assignments. So that is very related to some of the teaching context of the instructors that participate in our program. And then we also introduce ANCON, so a corpus analysis tool, to our participating instructors so that they can analyze their own student papers for material creation as well.
Thank you. So let's move on to Jiyoung.
Hey, I have used a variety of corpus resources, and I think I can categorize them into maybe 3 groups. So first, I use traditional L1, first language and second language corpus, such as COCA, Michigan Corpus, like my case, my course, and VOICE. If you're familiar with that, it's Vienna Oxford International Corpus Linguistics, English. So if you're interested, when I want to introduce some different, accent and uses, and like Anne mentioned, I also use Crow. So I use this traditional, somewhat traditional L1 and L2 corpus because this is a really useful tool for my students to check out language uses across different genres, modes, and populations. And second category that I incorporate a lot, I would say multimedia-based corpora, such as Euclid and play phrase.me, where you can access actual, movie clips or, some video clips. So in most cases, I introduce these tools so that students can use this as a teaching tool. And the last category is resources for corpus analysis tools. These are mostly available through either websites or software. So, for example, ANCON, Scale, LexTutor, Voyant, and some other NLP tools. So, some of my assignments, based on corpus linguistics, include texture analysis, so students can use this.
Let's have Shelley go next.
Thank you. So mine sort of changes depending on what course I'm teaching. For the pedagogical grammar course, I do use the same corpus that Ang mentioned, the corpus and repository of writing, partly because the MA TESOL students who are in the class are often teaching the writing classes, so it's really relevant for them in their in-service teaching. But I do also introduce things like the like COCA, and to kind of give them an idea of broader register patterns. We also use actually the Longman Grammar textbook, which also introduces them to corpus findings, if not a corpus tool. And then finally, in that class, they also do get introduced to AntConc so that they can get a little bit deeper into some of the analysis that you could do with these corpus tools. Like Jiyoung in my pedagogical grammar class, they actually do a text analysis as well. And so that's one option. They don't have to use that tool, but they're introduced to it in case they want to use it for their text analysis. So for just as another example, in the speaking, listening, and pronunciation class, of course, there I'm introducing them more to spoken corpora. And I also try to bring it in ways, Jiyoung's already mentioned some of these sites, but ways that really allow them to see the value of getting access to authentic language through these corpora like Youglish. And there's also a TED Talk search engine that I introduce them to so that they can kind of use these as resources, not necessarily thinking of them as corpus resources, but just resources that are helpful for introducing students to spoken language.
Thank you. So Larissa?
Yeah, thank you. So, as Shelley mentioned, depending on the class, I'll introduce different tools, but specifically on this pedagogical grammar class that I'll be talking a lot about here, I chose to introduce students to corpus through COCA. So, for example, we talk about how to do a keyword search, how to look for clusters, how to look for anagrams, and then we use COCA in class for them to learn this. So our main corpus, I think the one that students get more familiar with, is COCA. So aside from that, we use a lot of different online corpora. We'll talk about the challenges later, but one of the challenges I have is that students have like difficulty installing, for example, Ancong. So that's why I chose online corpora that are already available. And then we use a lot of other different tools to experiment with, such as like MyCase, MyCusp, which Jiyoung already mentioned, Scale, which is sketch engine for language learners, NetSpeak, the TED corpus that Shelley just mentioned, which is one of my students' at least favorite search tool, StringNet, like just a word. So we look through several different of these online corpora after they learn what corpus can do with COCA. So I would say the primary resource that they have is COCA. Also because my institution pays for the institutional access for all the students. So that's also an advantage of why I use COCA. Yeah, thank you.
So I'll wrap up telling you about because my context is quite different. And so in many cases, my teachers are actually having to create corpora because there aren't ready-made corpora of the different contexts sometimes that my students are teaching in, like a mechanic or letters to schools for parents to be able to read and write back to schools, maybe asking for excused absences for their students or doctor forms, things like that. So in many cases, we're actually collecting very specialized small ESP corpora. And therefore, you've heard several people mention AntConc, and that's the tool that I've introduced in these workshops to the teachers. And then we've used that to look at patterns, look at vocabulary that's essential. And then another resource that I use is, as Shelley mentioned, the Grammar of Spoken and Written English, to look at what's frequent in conversation. And so make sure that at these beginning levels, even though these are irregular verbs, we're teaching these irregular verbs like get and say and know and all those words that there's about, 12 lexical verbs that account for almost 60% of language and conversation. So I want to make sure that my learners and my teachers know that, to be sure to introduce that to the learners. So a lot of resources, and then learning how to deal with AntConc. So.
Okay, I think we can move on to the fourth topic, example activities. So let's start with Larissa.
Oh, thank you. So, as I mentioned, I'm going to be talking specifically about pedagogical grammar. So I'll describe some of the activities that I introduced corpus in this course. So first, pedagogical grammar is, it circles around grammar rather than corpus, but I do include at least a couple of classes. So we have like 3 classes that are specifically dedicated to corpus, but I don't want students to think of corpus as separate from grammar. So we do use, the first way that they're introduced to corpora in this class is that we also use the Longman Grammar book that Shelley mentioned before. So this way they already see the results of corpus research and have to look at it. But we also do worksheets, it's what I call them. So like every other week, they have a couple of exercises they have to complete. In each of these worksheets, they have to do something with corpus. So let's say when we're studying, for example, the difference between the genitive with of or s, right? They analyze different concordance lines with of and s and try to come up with what's the difference in use. And at this point, so I don't introduce the word corpus until later in the semester. So they're just looking at examples of these things. And then later, for example, when we're looking at the difference between adjectives and adverbs, I'll select some words that can be both, like for example, fast. and I'll give them concordance lines with the word fast, where they have to tell, is this an adjective? Is this an adverb? How can you identify? And then as we progress through the semester, I'll transition from just how can you identify to like, how can you use this information to explain this topic to your student? So this is how I integrate a little bit of corpus in each of my grammar classes, and also think how the student teachers can integrate this into their classroom too.
Thank you, Larissa. How about Randy?
So a lot of what the example activities that I'm doing is having the teachers be aware of the vocabulary that the students will need. So a lot of vocabulary practice based on research and resources, as I mentioned. So not just random vocabulary, but vocabulary that we know is essential for their goals. And then also something that's been mentioned a couple times are lexical bundles or chunks of language, and helping students to, giving them practice with, say, you can have a frame that will have a blank slot, but it has a lot of prepositions in it. So it's really useful to be able to control those prepositions more as a fixed issue than, I have to decide which preposition to use. And so even something as simple as teaching adjectives, you want to say, I'm afraid of, I'm interested in. And so not having the teachers just teach, here's some adjectives, but teach the words that are tightly associated with them. So a lot of the activities are that type, and a lot of trying to think of engaging ways to practice these things, or having a frame where you can have in the blank of, so in the case of, in the event of, and then having the teachers be able to show really useful fillers for those. So those are some of the activities that I try to encourage teachers to include.
Thank you. Thank you, Randy. I echo Randy, as a second language user, prepositions, these little words are always so confusing. Okay. Would you share your example, Anne?
Sure. So for the workshop that we facilitate, we focus on the in-service teachers. So we want to kind of help them with understanding what part of a corpus is best suited for helping their students' learning, especially when it is very specific to the learning context of their students. So for this reason, it is important to evaluate what a corpus represents before actually using it. So one of the activities that we have for the workshop is to ask our instructors to explore, for example, assignments in the learner corpora, so the CRO interface, and then decide which assignments that would be the most closely aligned with their courses. So if they were to teach maybe research-based writing course, then they might want to look at annotated bibliography or literature review assignment. And then we will ask the instructor maybe to explore different searches within that assignment specifically. And then these searches can focus on many things. If they were to look at, if they want to look at reporting verbs to report citation in the literature review, they can do some of that. If they want to look at transition words, they can also look at that. And there will be information for them to look at, like frequencies of certain type of words or sample sentences that they can use to help their students or different type of concordance lines. And then we also asked instructors to kind of share what they find and how that would be relevant to the course that they will be teaching. So it's one of the activity that we found to be very helpful in terms of helping them to explore the corpus.
Thank you, Anne. And some of you who are interested in teaching writing, maybe this would be a really great example. How about you, Shelley?
Yeah, so I'll go back to my 2 classes of the speaking, listening, and pronunciation course first. So with that Uglish or TED corpus that I introduced, I also, like Randy, focus on lexical bundles a lot. And so we use the findings from the Longman grammar to kind of guide the searches, but then they go and do searches within these two interfaces, kind of giving them a chance to play around with it and seeing what they find and how easy they find it to use. And then, of course, we bring it back to a discussion of how they could bring this to students in a particular classroom setting that they imagine themselves in or might already be teaching in. And then for the pedagogical grammar class, again, we use the Longman grammar, so we're able to look at examples from corpora, which of course is very much a great place to start. Like Larissa said, you don't even have to call it a corpus if you don't want to. They're just examples from authentic speech and writing. And so we use those to illustrate particular grammatical features that we're looking at in the discourse context, of course. And then they discuss how they can use that knowledge in their teaching. We also use this to evaluate textbooks, actually in both classes. So we'll kind of look at the corpus findings and then see how well the textbooks that they're looking at are aligned with those findings and what they might want to bring in addition to what these textbooks provide when they're teaching with them.
Thank you, Shelley. I noticed that Shelley used very tailored approach, for each different courses, depending on the learning outcome that she expects. And learning from Shelley as a former student, I use a similar approach. So as a reminder, I am teaching 3 different courses for undergraduate students, second language theory course, teaching methodology course, and technology-mediated language teaching course. So for my language theory course, when I teach usage-based approach or functional approaches to language development, I ask my students to search for selected syntactic features that has similar functions. For example, for ability, the function of ability, maybe they can think of I can, it is possible that, or the possibility that subject and verb structure. Or sometimes I ask my students to come up with the synonyms, like if reporting verbs are a good example, like starting from say, mention, and state, right? And then students check the frequencies, and then they compare the frequencies and discuss their findings in relation to language development trajectory. So why we have lower frequency for this structure, for this lexis, and why, what does it mean, which is more closely related to explaining, second language acquisition. Yeah, that's what I do. Another example is for my the teaching methodology course. In this course, I usually introduce corpus-informed L2 English teaching activities and lesson materials through my own demo, where my students participate as pseudo students. And then we discuss teaching principles behind these corpus activities. So we can talk about pros and cons in general, but at the same time, a lot of, teaching and learning principles like authenticity, data-driven learning, or, learner-centered teaching, something like that. And then finally, we discuss some potential modification for different contexts and population. And lastly, for my tech-mediated language teaching course, I do a similar demo, like as I do in teaching a methodology course, but the class discussion focuses more on the affordances of corpus methods, particularly compared with other technologies like ChatGPT and some other, multimedias. And then, so the focus is a little bit different, but these are the ways that I use corpus methods. Okay. And would you ask the next question?
Yes, great. I was going to say that people are giving a lot of examples in terms of the activity. So we're going to be looking more at the learning outcomes from students, more in terms of what are some of these activities going to be like for them in terms of their learning outcome. So I think I'm going to start with Larissa.
Oh, thank you. So in my class, specifically, we have two different big learning outcomes, or two different projects the students have to complete. I'd say the bigger one is that they have to create a lesson plan using Corpus. This use of Corpus is broadly defined in this class, so it could either be they define the context that they want to develop this lesson plan for. So it could either be the current classroom that they're teaching, or they can, if they envision getting this ESL endorsement and then moving forward to teach high school, they can create a lesson plan for high school, for example. So they can either ask students to go into the corpus and do things, like interact with the corpus, or they can use the results of their own corpus analysis to develop the lesson plan. So it doesn't necessarily mean having concordance lines in their lesson plan or having these things that we usually think of like, oh, this is a lesson plan based on corpus. Now, this is like their main project, so they work on this for a long time. Another outcome that they have from this class is that I mentioned that we talk a lot about different corpus tools aside from COCA, and this takes the form of students present a tool to the other students, and I always tell them to envision this as a TESOL presentation. If they go to a big like TESOL conference, how would they introduce this new tool that they learn about in class? So they have to present what the tool does, what are some of the advantages they saw, what are some of the disadvantages, and how they could implement that in their classroom. And this is really a talk like from teachers to teachers. I'm just a moderator of that discussion. So it's really cool for them to see them talking about like, oh, let's say I teach 8th grade, and this is how I would use this tool. I really like this function and that function. I usually learn a lot from this activity, because sometimes, especially I was thinking when students presented the TED corpus, there's a lot of functionalities that I didn't think of, but that my students were really interested in because they know their context better, right? Like better than me. So this is a really fun activity to do, and students really like it too.
Great. I think it's super, super practical for students to be able to have learning outcomes that are tailored toward their actual teaching context and also maybe for their professional development. So I think, how are you going next, Randy?
Okay, thank you. So because mine is workshops and not a course, it's a little different, but the outcomes are that the teachers are very aware or gain greater awareness of the resources that are available to them. So, that can even be journal articles. It can be textbooks like the Venture series or something like that, or some of the ESP books that are more advanced that hopefully the students can get to. They also, I think, have the outcome of great awareness of the need for needs analysis, to know, to identify ways to figure out what do my students need, and not just in the generic sense, but in the very specific sense of, and it could be that you might have 3 people in the course that the teachers are doing, where they want to be able to interact with public school and their kids and that sort of stuff. But then there might also be someone who works in an orchard and needs to be able to gain literacy to read manuals and keep track of a time chart. So really being aware of the needs and then how to meet those needs with activities that can be, so developing activities is a big part of the workshop, and how to make those activities meaningful and not just random islands of activities, but actually something that's sequenced and builds. So those are the types of learning outcomes that I hope at the end of a group of workshops and training. Sometimes these are, one-off. Sometimes it's something that's going on during a whole semester, but just every week or something like that. So very different formats for the person doing the workshops. And so the outcomes can be extremely varied also.
I see. I think that depending on, like you mentioned, depending on the people attending the workshop, they will have different type of learning outcome that suit for what they are hoping to accomplish. Very nice. I would like Jiang to share with us.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, so I also have created an assignment and project for each of the 3 courses that I teach. And all these projects and assignments are closely related to the activities that I talked about when I answered the question 4. So I want to scaffold. I want to provide scaffolding first, especially all of my students, they don't even know what Corpus is. They never heard about it. Most of my students told me that. Yeah, so in my second language theory course, I gave my students a role of student researcher. Yeah, so my students conduct a cross-sectional corpus analysis regarding their selected syntactic or lexical features. For example, if they are interested in the use of connectives, they can create a list of connectives that they can think of and search them. But this time, they're not just search them, but I want them to compare the frequencies and the usage between different modes, for example, speaking and writing corpora, or different L1 and L2 groups, or different proficiency levels. And then they write a report discussing their findings from a particular language learning approach, mostly from a usage-based approach or a functional approach. I make it as a group work, especially the search part, and then report is individual, and just try to make sure that they have enough guidance and scaffold from me. So I create a video guide, and so that they can watch it again and again, and also open up extra office hours so that I can help them. In the teaching methodology course, I noticed that my students find it a little bit easier, partly because I start with my own demo as an example. And after that, after going through a lot of discussion, and then now finally students have a chance to create their own lesson plan to teach 1 or 2 language skills. They can focus on speaking or writing, and then they can incorporate grammar and vocabulary. And then they need to use corpus-informed materials and activities. And they then conduct a small group demo. So for this, I use something called jigsaw presentation. So lesson development is done by each group. So each group of students, they develop their lesson plan together, and then I mix them within different groups, and then they give a lesson demo within that small group so that they don't feel too nervous, and everybody can have a chance to present their lesson. And partly because, I have only 12 weeks, and Corpus Linguistics is not the only part that I teach, but I want my students to present something. Yeah, so after they conducting a small group demo, they exchange their peer feedback, and then they write a reflection, including what they can modify, which part of the lesson plan went well and went bad, yeah, something like that. And finally, sorry, finally for my I guess something wrong with my audio. Can you hear me? Audio.
Yeah, I can hear it. I think we're hearing the feedback.
Maybe later I can talk about it because I can hear a lot of it. So all of a sudden.
I don't really know what's going on.
I'll try again. Oh yeah,
it's better. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a bit better. Yeah. I'll try to wrap it up my discussion. So the last piece of information that I want to share is what I do in the tech-mediated language teaching course. In this course, the project is that students present a critical evaluation of corpus-informed classroom teaching activities and lesson planning, lesson materials, and they need to compare these corpus-informed activities with other technologies. And they also need to suggest ways to maximize the affordances of using corpus in combination with other technologies. This is where they can be really creative. Thank you.
Great. I think very well aligned with the learning outcomes. Very great for the students to be able. And I think we'll have Shelley.
Oh, I think.
Can you hear me?
Okay, I think it's better now. Yeah, so I'll just share a little bit about what I do, mostly in the pedagogical grammar class. So I think somewhat similar to what Larissa does, I have two kind of major assignments, and they actually are scaffolded along the way, as Jiyoung mentioned, to be able to interact with grammatical concepts and through that corpus linguistics in different ways. And so one of them is a lesson plan. And for that, they aren't required to use corpus tools, but because the course is based on corpus findings, they are required to kind of justify why they would be teaching a particular grammatical feature to a particular group using the readings from corpus findings. So that some of them do take it to the next level because they have been introduced to some of the corpus tools, but they're not required to do that for their final project. So I think for me, that's part of it's also a challenge, but part of, the push and pull is, of course, I want to bring this in and I want to develop this corpus knowledge. But as Jiyoung mentioned, and I think a lot of people have, there's so many things that we're trying to cover in the class that we don't always have as much time as we would like to maybe, prepare them fully for doing this. But some students take that extra step and do that with their lesson planning. They also do a text analysis. So again, they're encouraged to maybe they're going to do an analysis of just a few texts, but use a corpus as a resource for finding those texts in a particular domain that they're interested in looking at and that they think would be relevant for their teaching context. And then the corpus linguistics class is really where I get a chance for the MA TESOL students to build up into a final project where they do provide a lesson plan that is corpus-based, and they do a teaching demo where we're their students and they get to try out their lessons and see how it's working for their teaching context that they choose.
Thank you so much. Back to normal now.
Oh, you're not back to normal.
It's good, right? Not?
I think it's okay. We should maybe move on to the next question.
Yeah, that's okay. I can ask the next question and then we can go back later. So the next question, so we are right now on question 6 of our overview. And our question is, what kinds of corpus knowledge are your students or student teachers able to develop? And I'll start with Randy.
So my teachers understand how to collect materials and what the process is involved to be able to get them into, I teach them to use AntConc, so they are able to know if they have to clean the text or convert the text from Word or PDF and the challenges of that. And I think the other major piece of corpus knowledge is that they understand that what they're doing is very specialized and not generalizable. So they can't take what they're getting from a set of hotel documents and say, this is what all hotel language is. So it's really that notion of being aware of the specificity and the representativeness of the corpus. So they learn a lot about corpus creation, corpus cleaning, and then also using the tools in AntConc to identify high frequency vocabulary that then they can use to bring to their students, but also realizing that their students are not going to be using tools like that in their classrooms. So that's a big difference with a lot of what others have been talking about. Whereas my workshop teachers are not teaching their students how to use online corpora because of the lower level of literacy and also the resources. So they're more aware of how to take corpus information and use that as activities for language learning and literacy and increasing literacy.
Yeah, thanks for sharing, Randy, because it's really nice to see such a different context from maybe like the rest of us, because it is, I think most of us are teaching, either in practice teachers or future teachers, right? And in your context, it's a bit different.
Yeah, and a lot of the teachers are future teachers, or they're in a practicum, or they're working with employees in their context. So it is a really different context, but it's also really fun.
Gian?
Yeah. So my students commonly develop corpus literacy across the different courses, but I will have to say each course focuses on a unique, quite unique, but also interconnected aspect of corpus literacy and language learning and teaching. So in language theory course, students learn to use corpus linguistics as a tool to understand language development trajectory, find the evidence that explains a particular language development theory, for example, usage-based approach, functional approach, and also describe language usage patterns. On the other hand, in the teaching methodology course, in addition to corpus literacy, my students learn to apply corpus methods to implement key teaching and learning principles. For example, data-driven learning, student-oriented learning, discovery learning, and the use of authentic materials and authentic tasks. So, and also they enhance their micro-teaching skills, which is important for actual teaching. And finally, for my students in technology course, they gain similar knowledge and hands-on teaching skills, like they can learn from teaching methodology, but they also focus on critically evaluating and applying corpus methods. They have to make sure situate corpus methods within the broader technology-mediated language teaching. So I just really make effort to make sure my students to use corpus linguistics to achieve the learning outcome of each course.
Thanks, Gian. I think that we meet several times, right, a month, and it's so nice to hear like you talking in more detail about your class. Now I'm definitely thinking like I need to include more micro teaching in my class. Shelly?
Yeah, so I think in all of my classes, students have an opportunity to learn kind of content knowledge that comes from engaging with corpora that is not available without corpora. So they're developing knowledge about English and, are able to see real world examples that the corpora provide. And particularly for speech, that's really invaluable for having discussions about certain lexicogrammatical patterns or other phenomenon that often are neglected in textbooks, but are that common in usage. So they also have opportunities to develop some pedagogical content knowledge. So thinking about how they're going to apply what they're learning about the language to their classrooms, how they can adapt that into lesson plans or activities, They have a variety of ways of doing that, or even just evaluating textbooks and seeing whether or not they're aligned with what they're learning. And then they all develop some of the technological knowledge, more or less, depending on the course. And of course, in the Corpus classes where they can kind of put all of this together in a much more systematic way with that final assignment.
Yes, thanks, Shelley. We're going to test to see if Anne's audio is back to work.
Yes. Can you hear me all right now? Yes. Yeah, I think I have to like exit and redo all the audio. But yes, for the workshop that we facilitate, we focus on being able to help instructors to have the knowledge to design and then also implement the activities that they design in their classroom. So before that, because of that, we want them to kind of know about the benefits and limitation of using Corpora to study and to teach language, and then from there be able to compare the different pedagogical applications that can really help with their implementation in the classroom. And I think one of the way that we do this is also to have to focus on the different effective teaching strategies for different instructional corpus materials within different contexts. And then that will help our in-service teacher to transfer into their own teaching. So in the end, we hope with the workshop, they can develop, a network with other instructors in terms of corpus linguistics, and from there be able to implement corpus in the long run.
Thank you. I'll talk about my types of corpus knowledge that my students gain, but you're gonna see that it's a lot of repetition from what our other speakers have. So I do focus a lot on corpus literacy. I want the students to know what a concordance line is, what is a collocate, what does the number 2 to the right means in a collocate, what does the number 2 to the left means in a collocate, and all these like words that we people who do corpus linguistics take a lot for granted, but it's super new for the other student teachers, right? Aside from that, I mentioned before that we do these worksheets where students have to develop from analyzing corpus in order to gain knowledge of grammar, of their own understanding of grammar, into looking at corpus for pedagogical purposes. So moving from just analyzing to understand, but also analyzing to see how they could teach. So that's another thing that at least I hope I'm successfully doing by the end of my class. The students are thinking about how to use this corpus information to integrate into their classroom. As we move forward to our challenges and questions, we also want to open for some comments in the chat. So we are here. Our goal here is really to give you lots of ideas of how you can integrate corpus linguistics into your classroom, and to show to you that regardless of the context, you can see we teach several different contexts. You can still do it in different ways. So we would love if you could share in the chat, for example, what context you're teaching, and if you are integrating corpus or not. And it's Randy.
So I'm doing what?
You're doing challenges.
Oh, okay. I wasn't sure if I was doing questions or challenges. So challenges obviously are for my students, as I think for many, and Larissa mentioned this at the very beginning, getting familiar with the technology demands, being aware of the resources, being able to use AntConc, and there's older AntConc versions and newer ones, and the newer ones are more powerful in some ways, but also more complicated to use. So sometimes I teach the old ones because they're easier for the teachers. And so I think that's the biggest challenge for the students that I deal with, is the being aware of the resources, being aware of the limitations of the resources, and being aware of how to use the tools, gaining the practice. And with any tool, it just takes time doing different things with it. You have to go in and fail, and you have to fail in order to succeed.
Or you have to appoint a next speaker, Randy.
I thought you were in charge of that. Okay. Ji Young, sorry.
Thank you. Yeah, I have similar challenges. I faced the similar challenges that Randy had, but I just personally felt especially pressured about the time constraints. And I'm not just talking about the class time, but the time that is required to complete corpus assignments for my students, because my students are undergraduate students and they juggle many courses, and especially domestic students, they sometimes they have a job and taking 7 different courses, so that's a challenge for them and me as well. And another thing might not apply to master level, but some of my courses are, we have a really larger number of students. One course that I'm teaching is 80 students. So managing a large class while teaching hands-on activities like these that are not familiar at all to most of my students is another challenge, and grading is also a challenge. Usually I have a grader or TA, but if I use corpus methods, they are not familiar with this. That means I need to grade all the assignments. So I have some of these practical challenges. Maybe Shelley can.
I can go next. Yeah. I'll be brief because I think a lot of this has already been said, but maybe I'll just add. Sometimes it's a challenge because a lot of my TESOL students are teaching writing, but it's really interesting to see that they don't make the connection with language use in writing as clearly. I think part of that's, some of the other training they're getting in teaching writing doesn't necessarily emphasize that as much. Not that it's, discouraged, but just that it's not a part of that curriculum. And so kind of helping them to see how language, even not just for second language writers, can be a really useful tool for writing instruction. So kind of bridging that gap. And then another one is the access to technology in a lot of the countries that my students come from. And so that's why I do tend to emphasize a lot on just using the corpus findings, as Randy has talked about a lot, so that they don't have to think about using corpora as only using the technology if they don't really have that access in their teaching context.
Yeah, I think I can go. I think for me specifically, the challenge would be the logistics of a lot of the implementation part of the instructors. A lot of them either are graduate students or teachers with different writing placements that might not align with some of the materials that they develop within the course. So it might be that they are not being able to teach that specific course this semester, and they have to wait a little bit more, or the time commitment doesn't work out for them. So I think the logistic of actually being able to implement some of these are one of the things that I find to be a challenge.
Thank you. And so I'll be brief with my challenges. So I mentioned that my students do have access to COCA through my institution, but I teach this class online, and students have to go to campus, and a lot of my students have not been to campus ever. They just enroll in the university. So even though I use COCA to teach, not all of them actually have the paid access, right? That would be the best way to use it. And this actually ties into something I would change in this class, which is I would move away from using COCA in the future because it's a challenge for teachers. Of course, I have the same other challenges like the time for students to prepare and so on. But it is an issue that I have encountered more and more is with the use of COCA in this context, because it allows you for a limited search, a limited times, like you can search the corpus. And I think we're open for questions. So if you have any questions, I think maybe Simone can tell us if there's like any questions in the chat.
Well, not many questions so far, but people may be shy. I have a question, like I think, well, actually 2 questions / comments. I find it kind of easy to introduce corpus linguistics in my classes when I'm dealing with future teachers or students who are going to be translators. But I find it more difficult with students who are like engineers or, from different disciplinary areas. Yeah. How do you deal with those specific students? And another question is like, what to do with very basic students?
For the first question, I think Randy has a lot of experience with this, even like with collaborating with engineers in research. So, yeah.
Yeah, I've actually found that the engineers and the biologists and the forestry people are much more interested in it because they're used to dealing with data and they like the analytic aspect. It's the literature people who have been it's been more foreign to them in some ways, or people who have done a lot of humanities work. It's not as, although I think that's changed now. People are more used to analyzing texts and stuff and thinking about the context. So, but I actually just did not just, I guess about 2 years ago, did a study on genetically modified foods and the perspective in research articles with a biology student, because they were very interested in, they must be using language in these articles. Is there something in the language that we're finding? And so, I was part of a research team with a bunch of biologists looking at GMO, pro GMO and con GMO. That was really interesting. So I haven't met the same thing. So I don't know. I would just relate it to data and analysis for them so that they can see, instead of looking at how a bridge is built, you can look at how language is built.
Yeah, well, actually, now that you mentioned that, I remembered once in my class, I had a student who was more interested in literature. And he was actually quite angry with the corpus tools because he said, oh, but this way we are just going to repeat language and we have to be creative, very creative, So, yeah, it does make sense.
Yeah. Maybe I could comment on that too, because I think that butts up against something in writing studies that is often a concern of using corpora in writing, the teaching of writing, which is that, we don't want to create, students that are just regurgitating formulas, right? I think that's what this student was maybe kind of responding to too. So the way that we try to frame it as through kind of rhetorical choices that you can make. So you see this data, you see these patterns, but it doesn't necessarily mean that you have to follow it. You make a choice. You make a choice as a writer what you want to do. So then you see that everybody's doing this one thing maybe, and you decide to do something completely different. So I use this example a lot because I love it. But so in our writing classes, we teach a literacy narrative. So of course you're using first person for that most of the time. And that's what comes out of the corpus data, along with other things, obviously, that we focus on for that. But then we had a student that just decided to use third person and try that out, how that would work out with a literacy narrative. So I think it's a lot of it's the way that it's presented, right? If it's presented as you must follow these, or if there's really a conversation about what to do with it and the choices that students can make.
And I want to add to what Shelley just said. A lot of times we can use the corpus texts to say, here are 3 different ways, or, to accomplish the same rhetorical goal, or like Ji Young mentioned, expressing ability. You can say, I can, you can say it's possible. There's many different ways to express the same concepts. And I think that's how we want to use corpora, not to say this is, not going back to the 5-paragraph essay that everybody has to follow the same formula, but that there are many ways to communicate. And here are some of the ways you can explore those different ways of communicating and still be very effective and creative.
Okay.
To your second part question about how to introduce corpus to like lower level learners, I think I have an example from one of my students actually. So I'm kind of stealing her answer to this question, which is, so she came to my class and she was like, what am I going to do with corpus? I teach K to 3, so really younger learners. So it's not really ESL learners, but really younger learners. They're learning different things. And what she was doing with corpus then was, let's say she was teaching things related to trees. So she got into the corpus and looked for different words that collocated with trees, and then decided to use those to do exactly the same activity that she would do normally, which is to use this board, and students have to glue the different words that relate to the tree. So I think even with lower level learners, there's a lot in terms of vocabulary that you can do. Another student was teaching things that relate to go to the park and then activities you do in the park. So he looked for different verbs that collocated with the word park, and he had to like filter a little bit to see what things that children would do. So, and then he created this matching game again that was using corpus information to teach younger learners in this case. But I think all of this would still apply to lower level learners.
Okay, thank you. Okay.
I can add a few more examples that I learned from other corpus workshop. This is not my idea, but I happen to like it, so I introduce that a lot. One example is, when we think about very easy words like big, everybody thinks now what that means, but sometimes the students might have why big brothers, not large brother, right? So what about the differences between tall and high building, tall building, which is more, natural. So these very, simple questions can be easily answered through corpus linguistics instead of you need to use this and this. So one part that I really like about corpus linguistics is a learning tool. It's not just about teaching tool, but learning tool. And the learning tool where learners have their own autonomy. So once they are introduced to this kind of methods, okay, I can go into corpora and they can type in, the words that they are interested in, and they can check the context by themselves. That's, I believe, a good way of developing their own, autonomous learning. So maybe that could be one example.
Oh, excellent. We have another question here from Rosani. Have you had students who were resistant to using corpus? And if so, how did you deal with it?
I can start since everybody's quiet. I think this is very common in my reality, at least, where I have these teachers who are already teaching like 9 to 5, perhaps even longer. So for them, it's like one more thing they have to learn. So sometimes they're resistant. As I said, a lot of them are teaching K to 3. So they're like, how can I use corpus in this context? Why is this important? And I think that bringing examples is how I deal with it. So in my case, I'm teaching teachers, right? I know Rosani also teaches translators. So for me, it's very easy to get some examples of lesson plans. Nowadays, there's a bunch of examples online, and show to them like, see, this is how corpus can be applicable to your context. And I think that seeing the practical makes them more interested in learning how to get there.
Okay.
Anyone else would like to add?
I can add one example of mine. Yeah. So sometimes, the courses that I'm teaching now, sometimes other professors teach them, and when they teach the same courses, they don't use corpus linguistics. And some of my students really liked it, but obviously I have some students who are resistant about it. And then so sometimes I give them a different options. So for example, in my tech-mediated language learning and teaching course, okay, so here's a list of technologies that you can explore, and I include corpus linguistics as one of the options, and students can choose 3 out of 10 technologies. Yeah, so that way they can they have an option. Another way that I deal with, I just really provide a lot of, I try to make sure to provide a lot of scaffolding activities and that are accessible even when they miss my classes. I create video lessons and video activity sheets so they can follow them easily. Yeah, but it's always challenging.
So I think one other thing is something Shelley mentioned, that when we look at language through these tools, we discover things that are undiscoverable unless we use these tools. And so I think by opening, the world of looking at language and being able to play with it and find out things that the native speakers of that language don't get right because it passes beneath the radar. I think that's a really nice way to kind of say, yeah, you might be resistant to this, but think about how, do you know this? Look, we're learning something new and we're all in school to learn, or at least we should be.
Yeah, maybe I can just share one thing. I think Ang and Randy were in on this discussion, so they can also chime in. But it wasn't necessarily resistance that we faced from one of our teachers, but just really an open honesty about, like, how do I use this? Like, why is this important? And she had signed up for a workshop where she was learning about it. So already, obviously she was engaged in some level. But I think just having to kind of walk through a little bit more of what is the purpose of this, how you can use it. I think that helps a lot so that, you can connect with what matters to the learners, whether they be teachers or other students, right? And so I think that's a lot of what we're saying too, is kind of showing what you get from this can help with that resistance.
Yes, I totally agree with that, especially when I was teaching my writing courses to my students that I use Corpus. That's when I actually have to kind of tell them, why are we doing something like this, and how is it going to be connected to their final assignment, and that will really help them to kind of imagine and to be able to make that connection for themselves.
Okay. Well, we have some comments, but we don't have any questions anymore. Perhaps we can wrap up. And I don't know, do you want me to put the slides on again, Larissa, or?
No, I think it's okay. Yeah. So we hope our takeaway from this is that, well, I mentioned this before, right? Is that we are each representing different contexts, perhaps Shelley and Randy representing several different contexts, wearing several different hats. We're so glad to have been invited to share. It was also a great opportunity. We have been talking about doing this in other contexts before. So when I got the invitation and I invited Randy, Shelley, Jiyoung, and Anne, this is exactly what we wanted to do, talk about the way we introduce Corpus in our classrooms and how different it is, how we have some activities in common, because of course we are always talking about sharing our syllabi. So this was really fun for us too. Thank you so much for the invitation, Simone. Thanks everybody who is watching this live or watching this later in the recording. I see you, from the past. Yeah, this was great for us. Thank you.
Yeah. And oh, sorry.
Oh, no, I don't know. Do we have time for a few more takeaways?
Sure.
Yeah. So I think for me, we hear a lot about how this is hard to do and, a semester is not enough time. And I've definitely seen that in my career where I started with one-off workshops. And I'm like, what is a teacher able to get from this? They can learn about a corpus and learn what that is. And that's about it. So kind of thinking about all the different knowledge that we are contributing to, but that's where it's nice to think about different places in a curriculum where you might be able to infuse it a little bit with this rather than expecting not everybody has a corpus class that they can teach in their curriculum, but hopefully I know I've learned new ways to also bring it into other classes that I'm teaching. And so that all contributes to different levels of corpus knowledge. And I think, as I kind of mentioned before, we all face this need to balance this work with corpus linguistics with other goals. And so thinking about how the corpus is actually helping you to reach those goals rather than being, something that you're introducing separately is always a good idea, of course.
Okay. Well, this presentation, this roundtable is going to be on YouTube, and I'm sure I'm going to use it with my groups, when I talk about corpus linguistics. So I'd really like, on behalf of CELSUL pelo Rio Grande, I'd really like to thank you. We had a few registrations after you started, so thank you very much. And I'm going to end the transmission now.